Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video after the Atlanta Hawks secured the first overall pick in the 2024 NBA Draft Lottery. My mind has been racing about potential Atlanta Hawks trades to kind of hit the reset button as the Trae Young, Dejounte Murray combination just hasn't clicked the way that I think the Hawks front office, the Hawks coaching staff has really wanted it to. At the end of the season, I was able to ask Quinn Snyder where Trae Young and Dejounte Murray are at in terms of figuring out their on-court chemistry together, and he said it's a work in progress and something that is still taking time, but I'm not sure how much more time Landry Fields in that front office there in Atlanta is going to allow for them to try and figure out their chemistry. And now with having that first overall pick and likely locking up Alex Sarr, the Hawks have a really great opportunity ahead of them. So if you are a Hawks fan, first of all, I'm super excited for you to be watching this video. I'm actually moving to Georgia later this summer, so I'm going to become a Hawks fan just like you guys, so make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. I'm very, very excited to be covering the Atlanta Hawks all draft cycle here. And I do want to say really quickly, I'm very excited for you guys as an organization and for Hawks fans in general. Getting the first overall pick, you were a team that, in my opinion, coming into the NBA Draft Lottery, I was a little concerned about the future of this organization. Were they going to be stuck kind of in the middle? Were they going to be a team left for mediocrity? And I think getting this first overall pick not only helps them choose a direction, but also gets them an extremely talented French big man, something that we've seen Quinn Snyder find good success with in Utah, having Rudy Gobert. Now he's going to have a defensive chess piece here in Alexander Sarr, who I do believe will be the first overall pick. I'm extremely excited for the Hawks. So let's jump into that video preview. After winning that NBA Draft Lottery, the Hawks are in prime position to upgrade their roster and to kind of pivot on their roster. They're not going to completely tear it down, but rebuild it back up with Alex Sarr as a key piece. Now, the question that I want you guys to answer in the comment section, will the Atlanta Hawks trade a guard this offseason, either Dejounte Murray or Trae Young? I want you to comment down below right now, who do you think the Hawks will actually trade this offseason? I'll give my thoughts in this video as well. The Hawks also have an expensive frontcourt going forward, Clint Capela. He's on the final year of his deal now, about $22 million. DeAndre Hunter has 3 years left on his deal, around $20 million as well. And then Onyeka Okongwu signed an extension this past year, and that extension is just about to kick into place. So one thing about Atlanta, they're actually a first apron team with that $7 million rookie contract from Alex Sarr or whoever ends up being the first overall pick. The Hawks are in the aprons, which is pretty scary for them. So I think not only do they have to find ways to kind of reshuffle the deck and adjust their roster, but they also have to find ways to save some money in the process. And the emergence of Jalen Johnson, I think, puts extra pressure on that because at some point he will become rookie extension eligible, and he's going to get a pretty hefty payday for a good reason. He had some really awesome moments for the Hawks this past year. I think his fit, especially with Trae Young, is perfect. And I think if you get Alex Sarr next to him, you have this really unique athletic front court kind of blossoming together. So the Hawks are in a great spot here moving forward, but they do have some work to do to really get to where they need to go, which is why we're going to start with Dejounte Murray trades. In my opinion, he is the most likely player on the roster to get traded for a few different reasons. First of all, I think his value is extremely high right now. He played very, very well without Trae Young, and I think if you ask scouts and executives and other GMs around the league, they're going to tell you that Dejounte Murray as a point guard is a very, very good player, and the Hawks extended him last offseason on what is a very good team-friendly contract in my opinion. I believe $30 million a year, very affordable, very cheap, and he's locked down under contract for a while. When you compare that contract to Trae Young's, Dejounte Murray's the far cheaper option. So with the new CBA, kind of the restrictions on paying a lot of players, I think teams who are in position to buy for a Dejounte Murray type player are going to say, hey, it's a lot easier for us to afford him in our salary cap table than it would be for Trae Young. And we also probably believe that Dejounte Murray, better defender, probably a better fit on a lot of rosters as well. So I think that will play into his trade value. I think teams will more aggressively hunt Dejounte Murray in trade than they will Trae Young. So I think the Hawks, first of all, I think they would have a greater attachment to Trae Young anyway. So I think it works out for both sides here where the Hawks are probably more willing to trade Dejounte Murray. And I think the other teams around the league are probably more interested in acquiring Dejounte Murray for the reasons I listed. So let's get into that first trade here, and it's one with the Orlando Magic. Now, there has to be sign-off here. The first thing I'm going to say, there has to be sign-off from Paolo Banchero. Remember, Dejounte Murray and Paolo Banchero had some summer beef a couple of off seasons ago. Now, hopefully that's water under the bridge. I do think there's a really good chance it is this year. After a Hawks Magic game in which Dejounte Murray hit a game winner, Murray spent some time in his post-game interview praising Jamal Mosley, the Orlando Magic head coach, and the Orlando Magic young players, saying that they're a heck of a team and that they're trending in the right direction. Obviously, we saw the Magic make a push to the playoffs this year, but in the postseason, we also saw one of their big downfalls, which is shot creation from the guard position. Not only did their guards not hit shots, but they're inept at creating shots. Now, Cole Anthony does do that a little bit, but I do think this is a big-time win-win trade here for both sides, because the Orlando Magic have cap space this offseason, and instead of going out and overpaying someone in free agency for what is kind of a questionable free agency class from an age and upside perspective, I do think getting Dejounte Murray would be a home run get for the Orlando Magic. Now, it does come at a steep price. It cost them Anthony Black, who they picked in the top 10 last year, a prospect I do really believe in and like a lot. He's a key piece here for Atlanta. Getting Anthony Black back with great positional size. He's a fantastic defensive prospect, someone who I think if you give him 25 to 30 minutes a night, he's going to be capable of being a point of attack stopper, someone who can also be an off-ball deflector, steal generator. He's going to make defensive plays a ton, especially with his length and size on the defensive end of the floor. Now, offensively, there's a lot of room to grow for him yet. He needs to continue growing as a shooter. He shot it pretty well as a rookie, but again, it's on lower volume. It's not the type of shooting gravity you would want from a guard. So there's still work to be done in his development. But for Orlando, this is an automatic surefire upgrade into your playoff rotation, into your playoff minutes. Looking at Orlando going forward, this is one of their last opportunities to really improve their team before Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero become rookie extension eligible, where they're both going to get massive paydays, I had to assume. So, with that in mind, Orlando has only a year or two here to strike. I think getting in on Dejounte Murray, who again doesn't cost an arm and a leg from a salary perspective, makes a ton of sense for them. This keeps some of their flexibility open. This doesn't push them far into the luxury tax or anything, and it keeps them really competitive, and it's a defensive player who has length and size to him as well. And you might say, well, 3 first-round picks, that's a lot to give up. I think for Orlando, this is actually perfect. Now, they're giving up their own first-round pick this year, which I think is a no-brainer decision for them in this year's draft class. I just don't see Orlando being able to find anyone that really solves any of the roster problems, especially with where their pick is slated to be. Then you're looking at the 2025 first-round pick via the Denver Nuggets. That pick is going to be a first-round pick for sure, obviously. It is going to convey. It's, I believe, top 5 protected. The Nuggets are really good. They might win the championship again this season. But overall, for Atlanta, it's just another pick to add to your asset pool, and you get a 2028 first from Orlando. So for the Magic, you're only trading out one of your own future first-round picks, which keeps your own trade flexibility alive. I think that's one of the most important things. But for Atlanta, you can sell yourself on getting some of that trade flexibility back. You're getting 3 first-round picks in a deal. It gives you maneuverability on draft night if you want to trade that 2024 first out to a future year, or if you want to try and move back up in the draft for another prospect. That could be something that they do as well. And you get Anthony Black, and you also save $18 million. It gets you out of those tax aprons, gets you away from the luxury tax altogether, and this gives Atlanta another young prospect to build around, a guy who is just a top 10 pick. I think this is a win-win trade for both sides. Obviously for Atlanta, there's a little bit more risk. You're giving up a former All-Star, but I do think it makes some sense. Now let's move on to trade number 2. And in this scenario, Dejounte Murray gets traded to the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets, I think, are in the process of trying to build to their roster. Obviously, they've been very hesitant to trade Mikal Bridges, trade Dorian Finney-Smith, trade some of their pieces for draft picks. This is partially why they want to continue building to their roster, and I think Dejounte Murray would be a tremendous addition. The Nets' point guard play since trading Kyrie Irving has just been pretty suspect. Spencer Dinwiddie for a while was the starting point guard, then Dennis Schroeder. That's just not going to get the job done. So they upgrade here to Dejounte Murray. I think he would be the primary shot creator in Brooklyn alongside Cam Thomas and Mikal Bridges. I think then the Nets have a pretty dynamic offensive trio of guys who can both play off the catch and off of a live dribble. And then for Atlanta here, I think it's pretty clear and concise why you're doing this trade. This helps you stay competitive now. You get a player like Dorian Finney-Smith, who we saw how successful he was in Dallas, playing off of a very heliocentric player in Luka Doncic. if you're trying to make Trae Young work as a heliocentric star point guard, which I believe he can be, Dorian Finney-Smith is one of the best options to have as a 3-and-D wing. He's capable of defending other teams' premier ball handlers, premier top scoring options, while still being a knockdown shooter, especially out of the corner. This helps Quinn Snyder's offense and his spacing quite a bit off the ball. He's a player who you don't have to worry about getting touches, and I think that's something Atlanta has really struggled with in the last couple of years after making the Dejounte Murray trade. There's just not enough basketball to go around with some of their talent. I think Dorian Finney-Smith's a player who fits in nicely. Dennis Schroeder comes in as your backup point guard. Not sure that's a huge part of the deal for them. They could definitely reroute him, but he has to be in there for the money to make the deal work for Brooklyn. And then you also get 2 high upside first round picks. You get the Dallas first rounder in 2029, which is completely unprotected. That could turn into a very good asset depending on what happens with the Mavericks. They already owe all of their first round picks out the door basically, and some swaps as well. So the Mavericks are going to probably be at a spot where they're not bringing in a lot more talent. They're also up against the cap, so it's going to be very difficult for Dallas to maneuver and continue bringing in talent. And if Luka Doncic asks for a trade in the next 3 or 4 years, all of a sudden that 2029 first round pick looks like a heck of an asset to have. And then you also get the Nets 2030 first rounder. And even though Brooklyn gets better here in this trade getting Dejounte Murray, we really don't know where the Nets are headed. They owe a lot of their picks out to Houston as well currently, so that could be another high upside draft pick. Yes, it's a ways down the road, but I would think Landry Fields, who just assumed his position within the last I believe 16 to 18 months, you'd have to believe that he has some real job security there and that he could bank on waiting for those picks a little bit down the road while getting off of Dejounte Murray's contract, bringing in Dorian Finney-Smith. This is not the strongest offer for Dejounte, to be completely honest, but it is one that I do think Brooklyn would consider doing, and Atlanta, if there's not better offers on the table, might settle for. Then we get into trade number 3, and there was a lot of rumored interest from the New Orleans Pelicans in Dejounte Murray this past trade deadline. Now, nothing actually came to fruition. There's some rumors right now that Brandon Ingram would be a part of a trade for Dejounte Murray. If the Atlanta Hawks trade for Brandon Ingram, I'm sorry, they're not heading anywhere positive in a long time. I like Brandon Ingram as a player, but the reality is he makes $11 million more per year than Dejounte Murray. The Hawks are already in a cap space situation where I don't really know how they're going to get out of it unless they dump salary. So this is a situation here where Dejounte Murray gets traded to New Orleans, and I just can't see them taking back Brandon Ingram. So even though the Pelicans probably don't want to trade Herb Jones, I think he would have to be the centerpiece of a deal here for Atlanta, and I think this is a home run for them. Herb Jones, one of the most versatile defensive players. I would have voted him all defense first team this year with the way that he performed for the Pelicans. Not only is he an excellent defensive playmaker, he's also an excellent on-ball stopper and weak side rotation guy as well. So you can use him in a variety of defensive roles. I think that's huge for Atlanta. He would be a perfect wing complement next to Trae Young and alongside Jalen Johnson. So I think Herb Jones really at the center of this deal here. Larry Nance Jr. has to be involved for money purposes from New Orleans' perspective. The Hawks could reroute him to a third team very likely. And you also get 2 first-round picks in here. You get pick 21 from the Pelicans this draft, and you also get that 2027 first-rounder via Milwaukee. Again, that's a high upside first-round pick. In the event that Giannis Antetokounmpo asks for a trade, well, we've already seen the Bucks kind of struggle the last 2 postseasons, and if they're without Giannis, this team is not going to be very good. So the Hawks are in a spot where if something goes wrong in Milwaukee drastically, all of a sudden you're looking at a potential top 5, top 10 pick in this trade as well. And I think getting Herb Jones just flat out makes a ton of sense for the Hawks. For the Pelicans, I probably wouldn't do this trade if I were them, but I do think that the Brandon Ingram thing just has to be off the table. CJ McCollum doesn't make any sense for Atlanta. This was the one way I could see New Orleans getting to Dejounte Murray's money. And this is probably why a trade didn't go down at the deadline, because these 2 teams probably are just looking for different things. I think the Pelicans would want to turn Ingram into Dejounte Murray, and I don't think the Hawks would want to do that. So if there's a trade I'm skeptical of having happen this offseason, it's definitely this one in this video. Let's talk about some Trae Young trades. Now, I do think Dejounte Murray is the more likely player to get traded, but I did want to cover a couple of Trae Young trades in the event that he gets traded. And everyone's favorite destination is, of course, the San Antonio Spurs, where Trae Young teams up with Victor Wembanyama, forms one of the best pick-and-roll duos we've seen in NBA history. Trae Young is one of the best passers in the league. Obviously, he's a very high-volume usage player. The ball's going to be in his hands a ton. the Spurs would have to figure out a way to make that work. That's not the way Greg Popovich typically coaches, but if Trae Young's going to adjust his play style for any coach and any player in the league, the reality is he would do so for Victor Wembanyama and Greg Popovich. So I think if you're a Spurs fan, there's optimism here that Trae Young could be the perfect fit next to Victor and alongside Greg Popovich as his coach. And for the Hawks here, not only are you saving $18 million because the Spurs have cap space, which is super important here. Again, this is where you would shave some of that money. You're getting a few young players. Keldon Johnson on a very team-friendly deal, I think, as an offensive scoring weapon could be dynamic for the Hawks in some capacity. Alongside Dejounte Murray still, you get a couple of young backup guards in Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley. For me, I was pretty low on both of these guys coming into their draft classes. I'm not certain that there's a real role for either of these two in the NBA 3, 4, 5 years from now, but there is some upside here that maybe one of the two of them hit. They both have some offensive capabilities. Wesley, very good ball handler. Branham has been a nice shot maker for the majority of his career, both going back to college and early in his NBA career. So maybe there's some upside there. I think defensively they both have some limitations, but you get 3 first-round picks, and this is really the big part of the deal. Atlanta, who already owns the number 1 overall pick, would also secure pick number 4 in this draft, pick number 8 in this draft, and they would also get their own 2027 unprotected first-round pick back. So the Spurs are giving up massive draft capital along with a couple of young players, Keldon Johnson being the most notable. This is a trade where I could see both sides being a little hesitant because Trae Young is obviously the face of the franchise right now in Atlanta. He would be a fantastic fit with Alex Sarr, in my opinion, forming a dynamic pick and roll game. But for that same reason, you would say the same with him in San Antonio with a different French big man. So for the Spurs, I think that the upside is here to justify a Trae Young trade, but I could also see the Spurs saying, we'd rather just keep our picks. Keep pick 4, keep pick 8, add some young talent around Wembanyama. We're not going to rush this rebuild. And I don't blame them if they do make that decision. And for Atlanta, I could see them being hesitant as well, moving off of Trae Young. But if they do end up making this trade and have 3 picks in the top 8 of this year's draft, they could really set themselves up for future success. They could come out of this draft with Alex Sarr, Rob Dillingham, maybe they get Matas Buzelis, maybe they draft a Nikola Topic who just sustained another injury. Maybe he could fall all the way down to pick 8 now, where you could scoop him up there. Atlanta would be in a prime opportunity, in a prime position to add a collection of young talent while also getting out of the tax aprons, getting out of the luxury tax altogether, saving a ton of money, and getting some of their future trade flexibility back, as well as getting their own 2027 first rounder back. Where the Hawks are right now in middle ground, this kind of resets and redefines their entire franchise while keeping Dejounte Murray, putting a ton of young talent around him, and really kind of just retooling this thing around Dejounte Murray, Jalen Johnson, and the rest of the core. Trade number 5. This is one with the Los Angeles Lakers. This is going to be one that gets met with a lot of resistance from Hawks fans, I'm sure, because I'm sure they're tired of Lakers fans trying to poach their players. In this trade, which again, I'm not sure this is one that's very realistic, but this would have to happen on draft night. The Lakers would get Trae Young. The Hawks would get a vast collection of players. They would get Rui Hachimura. Austin Reeves is really the key piece in this trade. Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood is in there to make the salaries work and to save Atlanta some money, as well as 2 first-round picks. Now, both of them completely unprotected, but both of them are a long ways down the road. 2029 first-rounder from the Lakers and a 2031 first-rounder from the Lakers. I think this is an obvious deal for LA to make, even though I'm very high on Reeves. I like Vanderbilt as a player. Hachimura has proven me wrong a bit with his performance over the last 16 months. I'm still skeptical of who Rui Hachimura is in the NBA and his impact on winning, but I ultimately do think the Lakers here win this trade pretty dramatically because as a team that is older and lacking real clear direction post LeBron James, Trae Young gives them that with Anthony Davis. You would maintain a dominant duo in the pick and roll game. Trae Young shooting off of LeBron could definitely fit, and I talked earlier about Trae Young maybe adjusting to more of an off-ball role. There's not many players he would be willing to do that for, but I think playing next to LeBron James for the last couple of years of his career, Trae Young would probably internally be able to make that adjustment, just knowing that he's playing with one of the greatest players to ever play the sport. And then for Atlanta here, I mean, again, I don't love this for them. Austin Reeves is really the one piece that I'm like, this is a really good fit for them next to Dejounte Murray. Rui Hachimura just feels like every other Hawks wing right now. I just don't know how he separates himself in their grouping, and he's already expensive just like the rest of them. Vanderbilt I do like for them, but he's not a good enough player to justify moving Trae Young. I just don't love this trade for the Hawks unless, I do think those 2029 and 2031 first round picks could be really, really good. Don't get me wrong, but you're waiting a long time for those. So this is a trade I would probably be hesitant to make, but I did have to bring up the Lakers. They're going to be heavily rumored in a Trae Young sweepstakes if one becomes available, and I had to talk about it. So that's that. Let's talk about some other trades centered around DeAndre Hunter and Clint Capela. Let's talk about DeAndre Hunter first, and this is a trade I do think makes some sense. I'm not sure if there's a ton of interest and value around the league for DeAndre Hunter, but I could see OKC being a team that swings on him as a team that has cap space already, a team that this offseason could look for a small upgrade into their front court, and just some more natural size and talent at kind of the hybrid wing positions, whether that's the 3 or 4. Obviously, they traded for Gordon Hayward this year with the hopes that he could be that upgrade for them come playoff time. Just really hasn't worked out. So now this time they're going out getting more of an athletic wing who has some still shot creation potential, shot making potential in DeAndre Hunter. Again, I'm not the biggest DeAndre Hunter guy. I'm not a huge believer in his game, but I do think for OKC it makes some sense for a team that is lacking some positional size in the front court. DeAndre Hunter is big and strong. Obviously, he's always played above his actual listed height. Think back to his time at Virginia, even as a draft prospect. And it doesn't cost the Thunder a ton here. You give up on a prospect you drafted a couple of years ago in Ousmane Dieng. This could be a good high upside swing for Atlanta. A player with really great positional size, some playmaking feel, shot creation upside. Now he hasn't lived up to a lot of that yet, but I still think there is some in the tank. He's still extremely young. This is a trade and develop move for Atlanta. You also get pick number 12 in this year's draft, which could be a very valuable asset. They already have pick 1, like I've mentioned a couple of times in this video. Getting another lottery pick, even though people are going to say, oh, it's a weak draft, there's good talent in every single draft class. And I think this draft class has been extremely underrated. I think there's a ton of good players, and at pick 12, I think the Hawks could either move up from there, try and go up and get someone like Cody Williams in the top 10, or maybe just settle on someone like Dalton Connect, who could be a really good off-ball shooter for them next to their surrounding core. And remember, this would be an ancillary trade. So if they went out and made that Trae Young trade with the Spurs, and then they make this trade as well, they would have 4 picks in the top 12, which would be just ridiculous. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that, honestly. Trade number 7, we have a pretty interesting deal here with the Golden State Warriors, where the Warriors unload some of their expiring salaries, including a young prospect in Moses Moody, who just has not found consistent minutes, but I think has flashed pretty good talent and potential. I think this is a huge win for the Atlanta Hawks if they're able to get this done. But they do give up a couple of second-round picks in order to facilitate this, because I don't think the Warriors are just going to be willing to move Moses Moody. The Warriors also have to give up a couple of rotation pieces in Gary Payton II and Kevon Looney to get the money to work here, but they get Clint Capela. And for people wondering why they would do this, the Warriors currently, as they're currently constructed, have absolutely zero rim gravity on their roster. They don't have any lob finishing threats, really. They just don't play above the rim very well. Trace Jackson-Davis is really the one guy that does that. This is a significant upgrade into their starting lineup. Clint Capela is a better rebounder than Kevon Looney, especially on the offensive glass when Capela is getting active. That's not to disrespect Looney, but Capela is just a flat-out better player. He's a much better rim finisher, both above and below the rim. I think he can get on the offensive glass a little bit more of an effective rate. I think he's a better rim protector than Looney as well. For the Warriors, if you're trying to make one last push with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, you have to find an upgrade at the center spot. You can't play Draymond Green as a center the entire year with no positional flexibility, no lineup flexibility. I do think going Draymond at center for stretches is very, very good for them, but you can't just rely on that, especially against Nikola Jokic, against Minnesota with the 2 bigs that they have. You have to have some size. I think Capela helps them quite a bit here. Yes, it does cost you Moses Moody, but I do think if you're trying to make one final push for Golden State's perspective, Capela does help them a bit with that. And for Atlanta, this gives you some real flexibility going into this offseason. Moody's obviously a player they'd probably want to retain long term, but then you could maybe reroute Gary Payton II to a contender, maybe reroute Kevon Looney somewhere as well, get off of some money there, and that way maybe pick up some of those second round picks back by trading both of those guys. Could be definitely a good pathway for Atlanta as well, while you're still getting the upside of Moses Moody. Trade number 8 now, we are talking about the Brooklyn Nets again, and this is a fascinating one, okay? This is one where you're going to have to stay with me here. The Nets get both Clint Capela and DeAndre Hunter. Now, the Nets right now are in a spot where Nick Claxton's heading into free agency. There's a real chance that they could just lose him for nothing. Now, I think the Nets are going to be very motivated to keep him. If I had to guess, Nick Claxton will stay in Brooklyn, but this still isn't a terrible trade for Brooklyn regardless. You're getting Clint Capela and DeAndre Hunter, two real contributors to a rotation, and you're excising Ben Simmons, who's an expiring contract. This is the final year of his deal. It does cost the Nets 1 first-round pick, so for Hawks fans, I can already hear them moaning and groaning about this. If you want to get a first-round pick for Clint Capela or DeAndre Hunter, I think there's going to be some real challenge and resistance to that. I did talk about OKC maybe being willing to give up pick number 12 for DeAndre Hunter. I'm not exactly certain that that's the reality, though, so I think in the event that you can't get a first for either Capela or DeAndre Hunter, this is your one option to do so. You trade for Ben Simmons, who maybe will never even play a game in an Atlanta Hawks uniform, and as a result, the Nets get two players who can actually play real minutes for them. It does cost them a first-round pick to turn Simmons' expiring contract into two players who they could actually keep and use in their rotation. And for Atlanta, it's, hey, we're saving some money long-term here. They're saving $3 million this year, which again is important with where they're at in the aprons. But then also it gives them real flexibility going into next summer where you're completely off of DeAndre Hunter's contract. You have an extra first-round pick to play with in your arsenal. And if they pair this move with the trade of either Dejounte Murray or Trae Young, you could be looking at a real collection of draft assets, tradable first-round picks, and all of a sudden the Hawks with Alex Sarr and a bunch of other pieces are in a spot where their retooling went way quicker than expected. Really hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks again so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more, leave a like, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.